The morning smelled like sawdust and old iron. Marcus Webb arrived at the estate auction early, the way his grandfather had always taught him to. The best discoveries go to those who show up before the crowd, the old man used to say, pressing a warm mug of coffee into young Marcus's hands during those slow Saturday mornings when they would drive to yard sales together, circling neighborhoods before sunrise, hunting for something worth finding. That memory sat warm in Marcus's chest as he walked the rows of items spread across the lawn of the Rink Callaway property, a sweeping old farmstead on the eastern edge of Millhaven County, recently released from the estate of Gerald Callaway, a retired mechanical engineer who had reportedly spent 60 years collecting everything from antique clocks to cast iron, cookware. Marcus ran his fingers along wooden tool handles, inspected vintage copper pipe fittings, and paused in front of a long folding table where miscellaneous items had been grouped under a hand-lettered sign, Lot 47, Unsorted Items, Fell as Is. And that was when he saw it. The toolbox sat at the far end of the table, like it had no particular interest in being noticed. It was large, about 3 feet wide and 18 inches tall, made of heavy-gauge steel that had aged into a deep, burnished grey. It had the kind of proportions that suggested serious purpose rather than casual utility. But what caught Marcus's attention most was this. Every seam along the lid had been welded shut, not latched, not padlocked, welded. A continuous bead of metal ran the full perimeter of the lid, bonding it permanently to the body of the box, as though someone had decided, with great finality, that whatever lived inside should stay there. Marcus crouched down and examined it. The welds were old. The oxidation pattern told him that much. Decades old, possibly. The box had some heft when he tried to shift it, not dramatically heavy, but present. Something was inside. He knocked on the side with his knuckle and heard a dull resonance that told him the contents weren't shifting freely. Whatever was in there had been packed with intention. He stood up and looked around. Nobody else was examining the table with much interest. A group of buyers near the back was clustered around a set of vintage farm equipment, and 2 women near the entrance were admiring a collection of Depression-era glassware. The welded toolbox had not attracted a single curious glance from anyone. Marcus picked up the numbered card beside it and walked toward the registration table. When Lot 47 came up an hour later, the auctioneer, a broad, cheerful man named Dale Pruitt, who had run estate sales in the county for 30 years, held up the toolbox and gave it a short, almost apologetic description. Heavy steel toolbox, welded shut, contents unknown, Dale said, and there was a ripple of laughter. We can't open it for inspection, folks, so you're buying a mystery. Who wants to start at $20? The laughter continued. Someone called out, "What if there's nothing in it?" Another voice. "Maybe it's someone's lunch from 1987. The toolbox had become the comic relief of the afternoon. Marcus raised his paddle at 20. A woman bid 30, more out of curiosity than conviction. Marcus went to 40. She shrugged and dropped out. Teenage boy shouted 50 as a joke, and then looked mortified when the auctioneer acknowledged it. Marcus bid 60 without hesitation, and the room went quiet before Dale's gavel came down. Sold. $60 to the gentleman in the blue jacket. A few people exchanged amused glances. Marcus felt their eyes follow him as he walked forward to claim the box, and he recognized the expression on their faces because he had worn it himself once, years ago, before his grandfather had taught him better. The expression of people who believed that if something looked unremarkable, it simply was. He loaded the toolbox into the back of his truck and drove home. That evening, after dinner, Marcus set the box on his workshop table and looked at it for a long while. He was a patient man. He had learned patience from watching his grandfather examine objects without rushing, without imposing expectation, allowing the thing to reveal itself in its own time. He prepared his angle grinder, put on his safety glasses and gloves, and began cutting along the welded seam. The work took about 20 minutes. The welds were solid, done by someone who truly knew what they were doing. When the last section gave way, Marcus set the grinder aside and used a pry bar to gently work the lid upward. It opened with a long, low exhale of old air. Inside, packed in layers of oilcloth and then wrapped again in what appeared to be waxed canvas, were tools, but not ordinary tools. Marcus lifted the first layer of cloth and found himself looking at a set of machinist measuring instruments, precision calipers, micrometers, and gauges, in a condition that stopped his breath. They were immaculate, cleaned and oiled and nested in custom-cut foam that had been fitted to each individual piece, with the kind of care that only comes from deep, sustained love of craft. He lifted a micrometer and held it under the light. The brand mark read, Starrett, one of the oldest American precision tool manufacturers. Swiss-made components. He set it down gently. Beneath the measuring instruments were more layers. A complete set of hand-cut threading taps in sizes he hadn't seen outside of museum catalogs. A collection of precision scribing tools with hardwood handles so finely turned they felt like something between a tool and a sculpture. At the very bottom, wrapped separately in a piece of soft chamois leather, he found a small envelope. The envelope was sealed, but had not been glued. The flap had simply been folded in. Marcus opened it and removed a single index card, handwritten in a steady, old-fashioned script. These belong to my father, who learned his trade in Stuttgart before the war. He brought them to America in 1951 with nothing else but his knowledge and his willingness to work. He used these tools to build a life. I have no children to pass them to. I hope whoever opens this box will understand what they hold. E. Callaway, 1998. Marcus set the card down very carefully and sat with it for a moment. He already knew what the tools were worth in a market sense. A complete set of precision, machinist instruments in this condition, from a maker of this caliber, dating to the mid-20th century, would command serious attention from collectors. But that was not what held him in that moment. What held him was the story. The father who had carried these tools across an ocean, the son who had kept them for decades, oiled and wrapped and sealed against the passage of time. The quiet act of faith embedded in that welded lid. A statement that said, I am entrusting this to the future, to whoever has the curiosity and the patience to look past the surface of an unmarked box. Marcus spent the next 2 weeks doing research. He contacted specialist auction houses, had the collection photographed professionally, and reached out to a curator at a regional industrial history museum who spent 2 hours on the phone with him, equal parts excited and moved, explaining the provenance and historical significance of what Marcus had found. The collection sold at a specialist auction 6 weeks later. The final total, after fees, was just over $14,000. But before the auction, Marcus had located, through the estate attorney, a distant niece of Gerald Callaway, a woman named Patricia who lived 2 states away and had heard family stories about her great-great-uncle's father, the German craftsman who had built a career in American manufacturing from nothing, who had become known in his community for extraordinary precision, who had taught his son Gerald everything about respecting the integrity of craft. Marcus called Patricia and told her what he had found. He read her the card. Silence on the line for a long moment, and then she said, very softly, he never told anyone where those went. We always wondered. He sent her a complete photographic record of the collection and a portion of the sale proceeds. A decision that felt not like generosity, but simply like rightness, like returning something to its proper orbit. The remaining funds he reinvested in his business and set a portion aside in an account for his own daughter, who was 11 years old and had recently announced that she wanted to be an engineer. Marcus told his daughter the story of the toolbox that same evening at the kitchen table. She listened with the intensity of a child encountering an idea that is rearranging something inside her. So the man trusted a stranger, she said finally. He trusted the future, Marcus said. He didn't know who would open it. He just believed someone would, and that they would understand. She thought for a moment. That's brave, she said. That's exactly what it is. He thought about his grandfather then. Those early Saturday mornings. The lesson that had shaped his whole professional life. That the most interesting things rarely announce themselves. That patience and curiosity together are a kind of key. And that sometimes the most valuable thing inside a box is not an object, but a story waiting to be carried forward. The Welded-Shut Toolbox sat in his workshop for a long time after that. Empty, but not hollow. He had cleaned it, smoothed the cut edges, and given the steel a fresh protective coat. He wasn't sure what it would become. A planter, a keepsake chest, a reminder on the wall. But he knew he wasn't letting it go. Some things are worth keeping, even after they've given everything they had. Maybe especially then.